Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Welcome to the Global Activist Network. I'm Lamona Chanda. I'm one of the co-founders of GAN, and today we have a very important topic and a very special guest with whom we're going to discuss and get her insights and expertise. We'll hear from her personal experiences and also what her views are. So today we will discuss how can we foster a culture of digital gender equity? Now, this is a topic that is very close to my heart because I personally come from a region where there's digital disparities. And I think in most of the developing world, digital disparities exist and it impacts women even more. So it will be great to learn from our guest. And for that, we have invited Tamara Dancheva. Welcome, Tamara. Thank you so much for making your time on a Saturday. I know you are very, very busy. We're really honored and privileged to have you here on our platform. And just before I dive into our questions, I'm just going to say a few words about our guest's experience and profile. So Tamara is a senior international relations and gender equality leader with over a decade of experience across global organizations. She currently serves as senior manager international relations at the GSMA, where she leads the organization's strategy on digital gender equity and oversees partnerships with massive organizations like UN Women Equals, the Generation Equality, Innovation and Technology Action Coalition, and the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network. She has held key leadership roles within the Women 20 engagement groups and the European Union Delegation as well. Previously, she led the Human Rights Program at Liberal International. She holds degrees from Rockhurst University and the London School of Economics. So, I mean, wow, that's a whole load of achievements and very inspiring for change makers who are especially women and who look up to, leaders in this field. I'm sure that there's so many girls who will be inspired by your work and the work that you continue to do so. So welcome to our platform, Tamara.
Thank you for having me, Lamana, and it's a pleasure to be here also with everyone who is watching.
Right? Thank you so much. So let's just, personal experiences, personal narratives always help. So let's just start by knowing, please, share a little bit about yourself and sort of what inspired you to pursue this area of work.
Yeah, great question, Lamona, because to be honest with you, I never thought I would land in this space, particularly not the digital space, because I don't have a digital education background per se. I've always been very interested in policy and advocacy work, and of course, definitely women's rights work. And this is really how my journey started. I was passionate about women and girls empowerment, having had really strong female role models in my own life, not least my own mother. And I always thought, okay, I want to pursue something that makes a difference. I didn't want to just have a job. And I felt that I could make a lot of impact precisely in this field because of my own first-hand experiences, which I'm sure for those listeners who identify as women, it's not a secret, right? Facing everyday, challenges because of who you are, whether it's hidden or open discrimination, harassment, and on and on. And so I thought, okay, having had an interest already in making a change and a better future for women and girls globally, I wanted to really combine that with my passion really for the written and spoken word. I knew I was good with words from an early age. I knew I enjoyed engaging with different people. I knew that I felt comfortable in a way being in a leadership position. And so initially I thought about pursuing journalism, actually, believe it or not. And then I kind of fell into the policy space, and from there onwards, really, it's been a journey. Having started in the public sector, as you outlined, with my first role in Libero International, following the completion of my master's degree, and then really landing in the private sector, where I'm currently here at GSMA, which represents the global mobile industry. So really, I would say it's a combination of passion, being at the right time at the right place, and determination. Because, as you rightfully said, it's really important to have those role models and to really, therefore, also have that belief in yourself.
Absolutely. And, all these things worked to our advantage because you are in an industry where we don't see a lot of female leaders. So, great. So, moving on, when we talk about digital gender equity, what does that, in your perspective, what does that really mean in today's, very interconnected world?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm sure to a lot of people it can mean a lot of things, right? What's the first maybe word that comes to mind? Lack of access to infrastructure, right? When it comes to connectivity. But guess what? I have a surprise for you. That has long been, in a way, a secondary concern when we talk about digital connectivity, particularly in the context of women and girls, but also globally, right? Our latest State of Mobile Internet Connectivity report indicates that 58% of the global population now has access to the mobile internet. Now, that's important because very often that's the first mean of connectivity for a lot of people. It's through their mobile phone, believe it or not, right? And so when we look beyond the number of people who are connected, our research also indicates that 96% of the world's population is covered by a mobile infrastructure, which means they are technically connected and should be able to connect. Yet 38% of that 96%, which I just mentioned, are covered by mobile signal, are not connecting. So what does that mean? It means that there are many other issues that we need to look into and unpack, and therefore address, to ensure that people are able to reap the benefits of digital connectivity and subsequently participate in the digital economy. Women and girls, of course, I say of course, sadly, are even more impacted by this digital divide. And our mobile gender gap report indicates that women are still 14% less likely than men to use the mobile internet. Again, and that's not because they're not technically able to come online. They are. It's because there are a number of other barriers that prevent them from coming online. So to answer your question, digital gender equity in today's interconnected world really means ensuring that women and girls have access. But more importantly, and beyond that, as the data just shows, they're able to use that connectivity. And with that, they can not just be a user, but also be an innovator, right? They can create and they can lead in the digital world on an equal terms. And we've seen that this is now more important than ever with the rapid emergence of AI and other emerging technologies, because again, a lot of the AI innovations in this day and age have discrimination embedded into their coding, because the person sitting behind the screen and coding these algorithms is unfortunately a male. And of course, understandably, they have a very different perspective and they're not thinking about user needs that a female may have, right? And we've heard so many stories about this. And some, of course, not so good. I mean, we've just heard a few years ago, right, about the discrimination embedded in hiring algorithms. This was the case in Amazon, but many other companies. So really, it's thinking, as I mentioned, about allowing women and girls to be on equal footing throughout the entire journey of not just entering the digital space, but really shaping and creating it.
You made very important points there, but I will just focus on one. I work with marginalized communities. Infrastructure is lacking in the sense that they don't even have roads, but the only connection they have with the world is through their mobile phones. Network is not great all the time, but that's the only connection they have. So I guess that's the positive story. But at the same time, I do see that there's so many pockets of population where I would say there is potential where access can be reached. So you have sort of touched on this, but I'll just unpack this conversation a little bit more through my next question. In your experience, what structural or cultural barriers continue to limit equal participation of women and girls in digital spaces?
Yeah, that's a great actually segue, Limona, because I started talking about this with my first intervention. And this is precisely, as you say, what is holding women and girls back, right? If technically 96% of the global population lives within reach of a mobile signal, what is the problem? Well, there are several. The number one barrier, again, probably not surprising, is affordability. But it's affordability of a device, handset device. I'm not even talking about a smartphone, right? Because there we really talk about meaningful connectivity. But even a basic handset, for a lot of women and girls, it's out of reach. So the number one barrier, according to our research, is lack of affordability, particularly handset affordability. And what is also surprising is that affordability of data, mobile data that is, has improved year on year. Unfortunately, that's not the case with affordability of handsets, which is why GSMA set up the Handset Affordability Coalition a few years ago, to really bring public and private sector members together to work to address this fundamental barrier, which prevents, quite frankly, those who are not connecting from coming online, but especially women and girls, right? Second barrier, again, probably not surprising, is lack of basic literacy and digital skills.
Yes.
If you have a device, but you don't know what to do with it, it's no use, right? It's just not good enough. Yes. And so the question is, again, how do you begin to unpack that? Because, first you need to, of course, have and ensure that basic literacy is in place. But then comes, as I said, the basic digital skills. And then, of course, you also have, the importance of being and staying safe online, right? So concerns around online safety and trust are big. Again, particularly, when we talk about women and girls, because there are concerns around harassment, fraud, and just basic lack of trust in the internet, right? Yes. Of course, here it's also, only right to point out that all of these barriers are underpinned by some of the harmful social and cultural norms that are still holding women and girls from being equal to men and boys in any society around the world, right? I mean, we know that no single country in the world has reached gender equality. So when we talk about, therefore, these barriers to digital inclusion, they're all underpinned by these barriers. Because when we even talk about online safety and trust, keep in mind that sometimes it can actually be, a girl or a woman can actually have gatekeepers who are preventing her from coming online, and who are members of her own family, because they believe that, by coming online, she will be engaging in, in activities that they disapprove of, right? Yes. For a number of reasons. And again, that's something that's often overlooked. And, we must also not forget, and you mentioned this a little bit, Lemon, as well, is the access-related barriers, right? Lack of electricity, perhaps. So how would you, for example, charge your handset if you don't even have access to basic electricity, right? Or it could be a number of other access barriers. And last but not least is also what's keeping the women and girls online. And if you don't have relevant content, you're unable to do that, right? Because we know that there are different, that relevance is certainly a key barrier. And it's a key barrier to both coming and staying online, right? So very often there isn't, let's say, content developed in a local language, right? And therefore that can become a barrier from coming online. And so again, I think it's a multifaceted, certainly picture, and while of course the barriers themselves are ranked according to importance, they each underpin each other. So you really need to be addressing all of them together to really have the best of outcome. Yeah,
I think you have addressed like many or most of the facets of this challenge. You have industry experience, you do advocacy. So taking all that into account, I would like to ask you that beyond providing access to technology, what does meaningful digital inclusion look like for you?
Well, at the end of the day, our own, actually, what I work for at GSMA, and the program is called Connectivity for Good. Now, why is that? Precisely because of that. Because at the end of the day, really the point is to use digital technologies in a meaningful way, to where they improve your livelihood and the livelihood of your community, right? And that is the end goal. And we know that's particularly important, again, with women, because they tend to invest a lot more in their communities than men do, right? So if you digitally empower a woman, chances are you're also digitally empowering her immediate family, community, and then, of course, beyond a nation. So access really is the first step. But beyond that, what's really important is, how is that connectivity then being used, right? So how are women and girls engaging with digital tools that in turn allow them access to education, financial literacy, economic participation, civic engagement, and business activities? And again, that came to the forefront during the pandemic, when all of a sudden, staying online became your livelihood. Because if you were a woman entrepreneur living in a remote village, that was your only mean of really continuing to sell your goods, right? Or continuing to provide your services.
Yes.
And this is, of course, still very much the case and day-to-day reality for many women who, as you said, Lemon, perhaps don't have easy access to a physical infrastructure, right? Or perhaps are unable to leave their children at home and go to the market and sell their goods. So that is where, of course, that connectivity comes into play. And then, of course, beyond that is, how are we changing, the digital economy, and how are we making sure, as I said at the beginning, that women are not just users, but also innovators? And that is just as important, because otherwise we can't begin to unpack those, biased algorithms that, still dictate to a big extent what digital innovations look like today, right? Yeah. And again, they're not being designed with our needs in mind as women. And so I think it's really important, therefore, when we talk about, meaningful inclusion, is to also, take that step beyond and think, okay, how are we also encouraging women to get engaged with technology, because there is often this perception that, be it a STEM career or maybe, a software engineering degree, well, that's for boys and men, right? That's not something that is appealing to women and girls, or that's not something that interests them. And again, that's not necessarily the case, but it's something we must work on as society to change, be it by offering, free STEM classes already at the elementary level, right? When we talk about education, or be it in terms of how we are encouraging more women and girls to take up STEM studies, and subsequently, of course, STEM careers.
Thank you so much, Mara. So, once again, very rich in your insights. And Al, as you were speaking, I was thinking of my experiences with some of the projects that I do. I do work with students in marginalized communities. And, I've come across textbooks where gender roles are assigned. So if you are a nurse, you are a female. But if you are a doctor, you are a male. And I tend to see that at primary, secondary level, girls are really doing well in math. But by the time they have selected like anything under STEM as their main major at university or college, by the time they're sort of moving on to higher years, you see a reduction in the number of girls pursuing those kind of fields. So that brings me to the next question. How can our education system better prepare girls and young women to thrive in STEM and also digital leadership roles?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Lemona, because in a way, that's also one of the core issues that we as a society are confronting these days, right? That lack of, we often hear that, right? Lack of women in the talent pipeline. You want to hire more women software engineers, or more, you want to hire more women to work in tech, but they're not there. And why is that? Indeed. So how do we begin to change that already at the educational level? So, in the first instance, I think, and you mentioned this a little already, it's really important to unpack how we are delivering the education, and how we are, in a way, really positioning women and girls, right, in textbooks, in curricula, and all that. And this is an issue that we as GSMA identified a few years back. When together with ITU, being the International Telecommunications Union, Ernst & Young and Women's World Wide Web, began to think, okay, there's so many digital skills trainings and curricula out there. How can we make a difference? And to your point, Lemona, how do we then, in a way, shape educational systems that can better prepare women and girls, right, to thrive in STEM? And we came up with the Equals Her Digital Skills Initiative, with the key difference that initiative really aims to deliver gender transformative digital skills education. That's a mouthful, but what do we mean by that? For the first time, we actually looked into the concept, and we developed a framework that defined for the very first time what this is. And in essence, it's an educational approach that seeks to transform the gender stereotypes, attitudes, norms, and unequal power relations to bridge the digital gender divide and foster gender equity and equality. In other words, we devised a framework that recommends to practitioners who are teaching STEM curricula, to governments, to private sector, to any stakeholder out there interested in this, an approach that allows you to design your STEM curricula in a way that not only seeks to deliver STEM education, but seeks to unpack these harmful stereotypes so that they're not embedded in your curricula. So, for example, things like, having female role models throughout the curriculum as an example of successful women in the field, or even the way that you address, of course, the reader or the student of this material, right? So making sure that you're using an appropriate language and that you're not really creating a divide by reinforcing gender stereotypes in your material. It's quite a groundbreaking work, if I may say, and our hope, of course, is that this kind of approach will become really the norm rather than the exception. And then beyond the actual, of course, structure of the curricula and the STEM, as I mentioned, is really the early exposure to STEM and digital skills. So really ensuring that this becomes part of our early education, that STEM education is obligatory already for both girls and boys as they begin their education, particularly in elementary school, and really creating then clear pathways into digital careers, because it's not enough to say, okay, take this digital skills course and then what, right? So how are you then also making that bridge and showcasing what a girl can do with her STEM education, right? What are the career paths she can undertake, and what are the success stories?
Absolutely. And, this is the first time I've heard about this framework, and I'm thinking this should be mandatory, because the way stereotypes can influence a person's thinking, this should be mandatory. Just a follow-up question. How are you reaching out? Is there any outreach initiatives where institutions can find out that this framework exists, or should we all be advocating for it and promoting it so that there's more awareness?
Yeah. So we formally launched the framework 2 years ago on the sidelines of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. At the time, it's a digital public good. We have also broken down the framework into practical briefs. There is also a toolkit that accompanies the framework with a checklist. So again, if you are, an educational institution or a practitioner that wants to devise a gender transformative digital skills curriculum, you can take our checklist, if you wish, and our toolkit, and do that without really, let's say, having too much of the burden fall on you, because we've done the homework for you. So to answer your question, absolutely, the framework is available on the Equals Global Partnerships website, so www.equals.org. And if you click on the publications page, you will see all the materials out there. And of course, if any of your viewers and listeners today are interested, I'm also happy to engage directly on any questions around this piece of research.
I think it will be great to, include the details and the website that you quoted as part of our webinar when we post the final video. So moving on, you touched about it in one of the questions that I asked you. Now, we all feel, I think this is on the rise, like scams, cyberbullying, all these things. So digital spaces can be empowering, but at the same time, it can be harmful. So what practical steps can platforms and policymakers take to ensure safer online environments?
Yeah, I mean, that is so critical, Lemona, because if you don't feel safe online, you're not going to stay online. We've all experienced it. And even for individuals who, let's say, are used to, right, using digital tools in their day-to-day life, at times they may still be faced, with this level of uncertainty or even fear of coming online. I mean, sadly, as a woman, I've suffered such an instance. Perhaps you have. Many of our listeners who are women will be particularly vulnerable to that, right? And so it's really important, therefore, to take action to ensure that we are creating safer online environments that are welcoming, to women and girls, especially because we want more women and girls to stay online. And also because we know that women are, more likely than men to experience online harassment, abuse, or even privacy violations. And we've seen this, Lemona, even when we talk about women in politics, who, by the way, believe it or not, are the most vulnerable group of women when we talk about online abuse, harassment, and beyond, right? So there are really three actions that I want to outline today on this topic. Firstly is really safety by design approaches. And what I mean by that is platforms should really embed strong privacy protections, reporting mechanisms, and proactive moderation systems into their products, right? So that said, how do we begin to develop intuitive safety services? For example, apps which can help women alert their contacts in an emergency situation, right? So can we ensure, therefore, that there are more tools like that women can depend on? And then again, and beyond that, can we develop apps, services, and other measures to help women feel safer online, right? So, how can we therefore ensure that, as I said, that safety by design principle is embedded in these services and platforms to begin with? And then, there is also the question of how do we help women and girls navigate the internet with confidence, right? And so that they feel they're in control and they don't fear, going online. So that would require providing the necessary training, right? And really teaching women and girls how to avoid and respond to negative behaviors and threats online. The second thing is really the legal framework, right? We need a strong legal framework that addresses cyber harassment, that firstly recognizes cyber harassment on an equal footing as as in-person harassment. And then once it recognizes it, it addresses it with the appropriate legal measure in place, right? And here I also want to talk a little about, online violence against women and girls, meaning violence which is facilitated by digital technology. So again, do we have a strong legal framework in place that acknowledges that this is just as serious as physical harm and abuse? And if so, does it take the necessary legal steps to of course, make such action illegal and in turn attach the necessary reprimand for such actions, right? And of course, this also is the case when we talk about online fraud. And last but not least is digital safety literacy. Right. So are we also providing the necessary training as part of any digital skills training out there that really, as I said, teaches women and girls how to stay safe online? And in my view, that should be a mandatory component of any training, right? Because again, this is so core and fundamental. And here, and for that, it's really important to raise awareness of these threats and educate women and girls about these threats, and as I said, really strengthen measures to protect women again against online abuse and harassment.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I mean, I think I have personally experienced, or I know someone who has personally experienced every single issue that you have highlighted. Recently, in Bangladesh, we have had an election, and that's where I was born. And all the female politicians, irrespective of which political party they were, representing, were exposed to massive abuse and bullying. So, and also I think I on a personal level, I do feel that the media should also be mindful of these things and facilitate, the digital space in ensuring that, because there's more control when we're referring to the media. So, I mean, very pertinent points there. I've asked you about STEM and how can we get more girls and young women there. But then, in terms of flourishing in the industry, if I were to ask you how important is female representation in tech leadership, and decision making, and how can organizations sort of ensure that we are accelerating their progress? It would be great to get your view on that.
I mean, representation is absolutely critical because at the end of the day, technology reflects the perspectives of those who design it. And I spoke a little about this when it comes to really digital innovations, particularly in the age of generative AI, which we are currently experiencing, right? And so, the first really big step is having those role models, right? Because if you can't see it, you can't be it. So how do we ensure, therefore, that we are connecting, young girls with female role models in the industry to foster their interest in the space so that they can then not just take a STEM course, but pursue a STEM career. And here again, I'm going to lean on our examples from our joint Equals Her Digital Skills initiative, which I referenced a little while ago, because a key component of this initiative is actually our e-mentoring program. Why? Because we recognized exactly what you're asking me, Lemona, and that is, unless we bridge that gap between the digital skills training that we aim to provide with the gender transformative angle to making sure that, of course, we are helping supply, for a lack of better word, that female talent, which is currently lacking, but that's the only way in which we can really make change. And so we established this e-mentoring program precisely with this thought in mind, to connect young and not so young women, perhaps women who are, rethinking their career path, want to take up a new career journey, for the purpose of connecting them to working professionals in the mobile industry. And what is interesting here is that the program doesn't connect them just to female working professionals, but to all professionals. Why? Because it's the role of men here is equally important. And so through this e-mentoring program, we've been able to do our part in, as I said, enabling in the first instance access to these role models, and in the second instance is really facilitating these much needed soft skills, not least when we talk about confidence, when we talk about also communication skills, and a plethora of other soft skills which are needed for a successful career in the industry. And this is also how we are hoping to change that lack of representation. And the other thing, of course, which is really important to highlight here, is that consistently measuring progress is important, because if you don't have the data, you are unable, right, to understand what really the issue is. And again, this is something as an industry we've recognized, and this is also why last year we launched for the very first time our voice campaign. And really at the core of the GSMA voice campaign is this desire to understand what are employees across our industry experiencing, right, at the workplace, in terms of perhaps why they're, especially if they're women, why are they not progressing with their careers, or even why they're leaving the industry. And again, it's so part of this effort to really understand, what's going on internally and how you can address it. And I think every industry should have this exercise, and ideally undertake this exercise on a yearly basis to really understand, okay, as a business or as a company or as an industry, what are my female employees facing? What are their challenges, and why are they leaving, or perhaps why are they not excelling, to more senior roles? And this is particularly important, I would say, for women who come from different backgrounds, right? Because my experience as a woman of Caucasian background will be entirely different to your experience, Lemona, right? Coming from an entirely different background. And so again, also, how are you reflecting that intersectional angle, in your approach, in your also data, measurement, and then impact measurement, and then of course subsequently recommendations, because there isn't a single approach that works uniformly, right, across the board.
Yes. You have already talked about it, but I'm going to ask you this question just in case you wanted to add something. What role should men play in advancing digital gender equity?
Exactly. So we started a little on this topic. Key, because unless you take the men on the journey with you, change is not going to take place. Because at the end of the day, men represent 50% of the global population, much like women. But more importantly, whether we like it or not, currently more men hold powerful positions than women, be it in politics, be it in business, any industry you look across, right? So with that said, you need more men to champion women in decision making and roles, and certainly roles that also with that have more allow for women to take more of the leading role and have the power, so that you can start, of course, seeing the change you want to see. Because if that man is not willing to give up his seat on the board of directors so that you can sit in it, guess what? You're not going to have the desired change, are you? Because at the end of the day, they're much needed allies on this journey. Also because at the end of the day, it impacts them just as much. Because, there's so many studies that have been quoted when it comes to what allowing, for lack of a better word, gender equality can therefore benefit the world economy, right? So in other words, and even if we just look at our own research here at GSMA, we have estimated, for example, that closing the mobile gender gap from 2023 to 2030 is going to contribute 1.3 trillion USD to the world economy. I mean, that is just one example, right? So at the end of the day, decisions around gender equality in any space are for the benefit of everyone, both men and women, right? There is no debate about it, and everyone knows it, right? So again, that is why it's really important to identify those male allies. And also because often, and I've seen this in my own experience, the moment we start talking about these issues, the room is full with just women. Why? It's not a women's issue, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and again, I need to be careful what I say here. At the end of the day, it's the men who are part of the problem, right? And so that's why you need to speak to them and with them, right? In order to address the issues that are causing this, at the end of the day, power disbalance, right? And this inequity. So it's really inevitable.
Yes, and I totally understand where you're coming from, because it's not that we're blaming men, but that's how the system emerged. And we can't get ahead, leaving them aside, and it's just, only women discussing. So what policies or accountability mechanisms are, in your view, most effective in closing the digital gender gap?
I mean, firstly, really understanding the reality of connectivity for women, right? I just spoke about the importance of tracking what the issue is, and then on the basis of that, issuing the necessary recommendations. And so with that said, it's really critical to consistently measure women's experiences with connectivity, right? And ensuring that both governments and private sector are collecting and using sex desegregated data on digital access, on digital usage, on digital entrepreneurship, digital participation, and beyond. Because you cannot close what you don't measure. And that is still, believe it or not, one of the biggest issues we have. We simply don't have this data, right? And if we don't have this data, we can't possibly begin to form the right solution. And so that is the first step. Secondly, is really embedding gender metrics in national digital strategies, because that allows us to identify who is left behind, right? And therefore, with that, we can design interventions that actually reach them. Thirdly, is also having in place policies that go beyond just infrastructure investment and focus on meaningful use. I mean, I started the webinar by quoting really the core of the issue, and that is not the coverage gap, which currently stands at only 4%, but it's the usage gap, which the GSMA estimates it's 9 times the coverage gap. So really is investing therefore in policies that are able to support that usage, particularly among women and girls. And with that, of course, comes addressing the key barriers to digital inclusion, which I spoke about earlier in this webinar, right? So addressing barriers such as lack of affordability of devices and data, lack of literacy in digital skills, making sure that digital environments are safe and welcoming for women and girls, having the relevant content, and making sure that you're also, ensuring that you have the right circumstances in place which facilitate that usage, right? Be it, as I mentioned, electricity, or be it any other access related issue. And then, of course, which is the more difficult part, is beginning to unpack these harmful social and cultural stereotypes that are holding women and girls back. Because guess what? Even if you address all of the barriers I just spoke about, you would still not have digital gender equality. Why? Because of these existing harmful social stereotypes and norms. And with that, it's also really important to invest in gender transformative digital skills programs. I mean, I just spoke about the framework, right? So how are you devising programs that really speak to and address the unique learner needs that women and girls have, right? And also, how are you, with that, incentivizing those women and girls to participate in those digital skills programs? And that can also be upskilling programs, right? Because basic digital literacy is critical. But then beyond that, how are you incentivizing women and girls to continue their education in STEM? And then, of course, make the last step into STEM career. So really, it's a multifaceted approach. But these, I would say, are some of my immediate recommendations.
So, I mean, every single issue or every single insight that you have shared, I feel that they're so relevant and they're so important that we can have separate discussions on each of them. But I'm just conscious of time. So looking ahead, what gives you hope and what concerns you? You talked about AI a little bit. So, I mean, if that's one of your hope or concerns, feel free to talk about that. So what gives you hope and what concerns you most about the future of digital gender equity?
I mean, what gives me hope is that mobile technology has now become one of the most powerful tools for inclusion, right? Yes. I mean, mobile networks already reach 96% of the global population. And that's great news. That's extremely positive, particularly if you think about the tremendous progress made on behalf of governments, mobile network operators, and other stakeholders to make this a reality, right? So that means that the infrastructure for digital inclusion largely exists. However, what concerns me is that progress in closing the digital gender gap has slowed in recent years, and hundreds of millions of women still remain offline despite this wonderful advancement that we have made when it comes to infrastructure and coverage, right? So that is something that we see still needs a lot of conscious effort and investment in. Because otherwise, you're not going to make the progress you need. And again, when we talk about the digital divide, women and girls are the ones that are going to be left behind more likely than not, because they're more vulnerable. Another concern I have, and you touched on this, of course, Lemona, is the quick rise in artificial intelligence. On the one hand, that is bound to reinforce existing inequalities if women are not involved in their design and governance. And we've heard also a lot in recent years about the importance of ethical and responsible AI, right?
Yes.
And on the other hand, it's also going to leave even more women and girls behind, because everyone now talks about the importance of, having the right AI skills, right? Knowing how to use, these tools, forgetting that for hundreds of millions of girls out there, that's completely out of reach because they don't even have the basic digital literacy yet, right? And that is why I think investing in digital skills and leadership opportunities is so important, because otherwise we're not going to see the change that we wish to see, and certainly it's not going to be fast, to say the least.
You have already, made some recommendations, but if you were considering your top 3 recommendations to national level and global leaders towards achieving digital gender equity, what would they be?
I mean, firstly, it's really making digital gender equity a core pillar of any national digital strategy with clear targets and accountability mechanisms. Of course, here, it's no secret that very often this is also treated as a separate topic when it's not. It's a cross-cutting topic, right?
Yes.
So that is really important. The second thing is investing in inclusive digital skills ecosystems. So really, leaning on existing resources out there, such as the Equals Gender Transformative Digital Skills Education Framework, but beyond. So really thinking consciously about how are you devising, digital skills programming for women and girls, and also how are you keeping women and girls engaged in your programming. And thirdly is really increasing women's representation in the digital economy, right? So bridging that gap between the STEM education and the STEM career. And with that is really allowing access to female role models, but also, as I mentioned, making a decision to invest in this and ensure that STEM education is mandated right from an early age, and that of course you're not reinforcing already existing stereotypes. And here, Lemon, when you spoke about it, also public-private partnerships are key, and this is where I would say my fourth recommendation is, and that's critical because no stakeholder can close the digital gender divide on their own. Working, with public and private sector players is critical on an equal footing because they each bring different knowledge and resources to the table, right? And we know that with that, as you mentioned, the role of media is key, the role of civil society is key, all of our role as individual citizens is key, the role of the mobile industry and beyond, tech industry, of course, key, governments, of course, and international organizations. So really, every stakeholder has a role to play, and it's really important to engage them concurrently to make and sustain change.
Thank you. So we've almost reached the end of our questions. Before I ask you my last one, I'm requesting everyone to ask questions if they have any, and we have received one from Gertrude. Gertrude asked you, what has been the most challenging and rewarding phase in your career so far?
Great question. So the most rewarding part of my career is really having the opportunity to speak with women and girls that have benefited from some of the programming I've worked on, right? So really seeing what that has meant in their day-to-day life. Because, sitting here in London very comfortably behind my computer screen is one thing, but then really understanding, what for example, Equals Her Digital Skills has meant to a young woman in Nairobi who has perhaps connected to a working professional in the mobile industry for the very first time because of my work has truly meant so much for me because I've been able to witness firsthand the impact on their life, right? And I would say the most challenging part of my career is the fact that I just can't do it all, right? I can't change what I want to change quickly enough. And I also cannot do it on my own. And sometimes, it's very frustrating to see that as you make progress in one area, perhaps you take a step back or two in another.
Thank you. I think, I think we all connect with your response here, and also the fact that you want to do so much. I strongly believe it is because you're a woman, and that's how women leaders think.
Yeah.
They're biologically inclusive, so that's
Yeah.
great. I'm just going to see if we receive any more questions, but I wanted to ask you a follow-up question from the questions that I've already asked. Did you come across any country or any project where you see that it can be a good case study where they're sort of, addressing the digital gender gaps?
Absolutely, Lemona. I mean, I'm sure that many of you have heard of the Rwanda Digital Ambassadors Program. I personally find Rwanda's progress when it comes to digital transformation fascinating. I don't know how many of you have been to the country, but it's just really impressive to see how they have embedded the use of digital tools in their, day-to-day life. That in and of itself is impressive. But what they have been able to really successfully do through this digital ambassadors program is really increase the digital literacy of 5 million Rwandan citizens. Wow. And that's huge, right? And that's by the virtue of really having those, citizens that in turn serve as ambassadors in their community, and are advocating for the use of, connectivity, for the use of digital tools, and beyond. And I, personally find that such a great success story, and I would hope that, more countries can learn from that experience. And this is also why it's important to have that public-private sector partnership, because then you can learn from success stories such as this one.
Absolutely, and that's such an inspiring example to impact that kind of a figure. So I'm sure who our listeners, our audience, and everyone watching this webinar at some point will take lessons from all the things that you have shared. And like I said, I think each thing you highlighted requires a separate discussion because they're so valid in the industry. But I will ask you our last question. Sure. I would like to request any final words that you have, and if anyone wanted to reach out to you to have a discussion of anything, how do we reach you?
Thank you, Lemon. Firstly, it's been really an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. And maybe I end on a very positive note by saying that, I feel tremendously encouraged, but also tremendously privileged to be working in this space because of strong female leaders who are leading by example. And here I really want to commend the GSMA Chief Marketing Officer, Lara Dior. She's a phenomenal leader in the space, and actually, as of recently, my new boss, because she made the decision to incorporate a very important industry-led partnership called Change the Face into the GSMA Connectivity for Good program. Change the Face was established nearly 5 years ago, as the name alludes, to drive change when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our very much male-dominated industry. Yeah. And it's an initiative that Vodafone led quite successfully under the leadership of Serpio Timorai, another wonderful example of a female role model, who at the time served as CEO of Vodafone Investments. And she saw the need to really shake up things. And I am just in such awe that now GSMA's own leadership, and Lara in particular, decided to adopt this initiative, for lack of a better word, into GSMA, and really make this determination to ensure that GSMA, as the representative body of the mobile industry, is therefore also rightfully leading on these conversations by representing the Change the Face Alliance and hosting its General Secretariat here in our offices in London. So I'm very privileged, as I said, to be now spearheading this work, and it gives me a great amount of hope. And that is such a great example, Lemona, of how women lead, because, they lead by actually, making change rather than just talk about making change, right? So watch this space. That said, lots of exciting things therefore coming. Will be coming your way with this very exciting transition, and you can certainly reach out to me either on my via my LinkedIn profile or of course via my email address, which I can also provide for you, Lemona, to include.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tamara. And I would just like to highlight that we discussed, digital gender equity, and we're so privileged that we had someone like you who happens to be a female, who happens to be a leader in this sector. And it's also inspiring to see that you have highlighted some of the other leaders who have inspired you. So I hope that it triggers a chain reaction. It inspires girls from around the world who's watching this webinar to explore and also be conscious of what can be done around us and how can we all take a more leadership role in this industry. Thank you so much for your time, Tamara. It has been an excellent discussion. I will go back to listen to it again for all the things that you shared, and I encourage everyone to do so. On a side note, I would like to thank everyone who joined us and who will be watching our webinar at a later stage. And we are on most social media platforms. We're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Spotify, Instagram, Twitter. So please follow our socials. Please support us. If you come across a very inspiring story of social impact, please nominate. We would like to write an article about an issue impacting sustainability. Please do write. There's so many things that we do. Please check out our socials and support us. And lastly, thank you once again, Tamara, for joining us and sharing your insights. We'll see you all next time with another very interesting topic.